Hi skiers, I'm Jeff from Skiessentials.com. Today we're going to talk about some touring equipment and kind of specifically how to choose the right touring setup, especially if you're brand new to Alpine touring. So before we get into it, if you are an experienced Alpine touring enthusiast, this video is not really for you. That said, we are going to have a series of videos where we kind of dive deeper into the differences between different skis and different boots and different bindings and stuff like that, kind of like we do with our Alpine comparison videos. So if you're already like an experienced touring backcountry enthusiast, we will have some videos for you. This is more intended for people who are pretty new to touring, maybe brand new to touring, maybe you have a little bit of experience, but you're a little bit confused still about where to start, and justifiably so, because Alpine touring can be pretty confusing when it comes to choosing gear. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of different stuff here. I have a fair amount of experience Alpine touring, but I am not an expert. Something that I put in the written version of this guideline is backcountry touring is like a lifelong journey. It's similar to the sense that skiing is too, but there's so much to learn in the world of Alpine touring and backcountry skiing. So I say I'm not an expert because, I am not out there teaching avalanche courses and stuff like that. You can spend a lifetime in this activity and still not, there's always something to learn. So just wanted to get that out there before we get into the equipment that we're going to talk about. We're not going to be, giving you avalanche safety guidelines in this video at the end. We will give you some kind of recommendations of future learning or other, the next step after you've watched this video. But this is really just to make you feel a little bit more comfortable about selecting your gear or navigating the options that are out there. So I've got a bunch of stuff with me. There's a bunch of boots down here too that you can't see on that camera, but you can see on that camera. So we're going to talk a little bit about everything here, kind of how it all fits together and what might be right for you, or at least give you some ways to think about all this stuff, and ultimately, hopefully, you end up feeling much more confident about what you're choosing. So before we talk about anything here, my biggest piece of advice in a situation like this, and this exact situation, is take a moment to assess yourself as a skier and assess your needs when it comes to Alpine touring. There's a lot of different directions you can go here. So first, what type of skier are you? Are you an aggressive skier? Are you a playful skier? Are you looking to go in the backcountry and hit backcountry jumps? Or are you planning on using this as more exercise? Or you are thinking you're going to be more resort-based touring, like touring up a groomed slope that your resort designates as uphill, and then skiing down resort trails. So it's important to kind of take a moment to assess your needs. Like how many times this year will you be skiing in general? How many of those times will you be Alpine touring? And I would even, it sounds kind of silly, but I would even take out a piece of paper or a notebook and start jotting down some thoughts. In the written version of this, which I encourage you to go through as well, I listed more questions of ways you can kind of qualify yourself or paint a picture or a profile of yourself as a skier. And I think that's a really, really important place to start. As you're kind of choosing this gear and making selections between one type of binding or one type of boot and another, it's pretty important to be able to kind of go back to that and say oh, I might not need this because I'm realistically only going to be touring a handful of times this season. So that said, I think we can get right into things. I tried to bring as many examples as I could into this video. there's obviously like way more options than what we have here. So if you have more questions, as always, don't hesitate to leave a comment. Give us a call directly. You can chat with one of our customer service guys, and they are through and through. They know a ton about this gear, so don't hesitate to reach out if you have more questions. So with touring and with a lot of things in skiing, the boots are kind of the most important thing, or at least a really, really good place to start. So there's kind of three ways to think about choosing a touring boot. The first of which is a growing segment in the ski industry, which is what we're going to call a hybrid boot. This happens to be the Nordica Strider 130. I've got a few boots here. I've got the Salomon Shift 130 as well as the Lang XT3 130. So these are all 130 flex boots. They're all designed for alpine touring, but they're also all really good in the resort. So going back to kind of painting that picture of yourself as a skier, a boot like this is going to be a really good choice if, a few different scenarios. One, if you really value downhill performance. So kind of going back to that picture of you as a skier, if you wrote down, I am touring so that I can get really cool lines, or like, I'm specifically going up so I can come back down. These are really good choices. If you value downhill performance more than anything else as a touring boot, this is really good because it's really, really good alpine performance. Now, another reason why these boots have become so popular is because these can double as an alpine boot, as a resort boot, as well as your touring boot. So pretty much all of these boots, or these three boots in front of me, all have grip walk soles, which are, DIN certified, work really well in pretty much all alpine bindings now. So going back to that picture of you as a skier, if you're thinking like, I might tour a handful of times this season, but not really enough to justify spending the amount of money on like a whole dedicated touring setup, this is a really good boot. A boot like this can be your only ski boot. You can ski this at the resort, you can tour in this boot, etc., etc., etc. The other way to go with this is more of a touring specific boot. So as we move into boots like this is the Salomon S-Lab. They're lighter. These all use rockered touring soles. So I've got a Scarpa up here, and we've also got the Technica Zero G Pro. So all three of these boots are lighter, and they all use different soles. Now the important thing with all these boots is they all have tech fittings in the toe. So these three, they all kind of have the little like guide thing, it comes in the box as a little protective plastic thing. But these all have tech fittings in the toe, which is going to come into play when we get into bindings, but that's really important. Now, these boots are designed more for people who are putting more emphasis on either touring as a whole. So if you're going back to that picture of you as a skier, if you're thinking like, I don't really have much desire to go in or to do much resort skiing this year, I really want to spend as much time touring or in the backcountry as I possibly can. Boots like this are great because they are less tiring and more efficient for the uphill. Now, do you lose alpine performance or do you lose downhill performance when you go from a hybrid touring boot to more of a specific touring boot like something like this or these two next to me? Yeah, you do. It's safe to say that these do not perform as well on the descent as these three boots down there. So something, and you'll probably pick up on this, is choosing an alpine touring setup often feels like choosing where you're going to make your sacrifice. And I think, even if that sounds kind of negative, I think that's a pretty good way to think about it, because you're always going to be making a sacrifice somewhere. If you choose a boot like these three down here, you're going to have a heavier boot. You know, it's as simple as that. So it's going to be more fatiguing on the uphill. If you choose a boot like this, you're not going to have as much downhill performance. Usually they're softer flexing, not as much lateral support, stuff like that. Also, these soles, these Rockard touring soles, are not going to work in a lot of Alpine bindings. So, going back to that picture of you as a skier, if you've already got a garage or a basement full of Alpine skis and you want your next boot to be able to work with all of those, these are not going to. Now, there are some bindings that will accept a Rockard touring sole like this, but there aren't that many. So really keep that in mind. You know, if you're shopping for bindings and boots, chances are you should be able to look through the features and it'll tell you what it's compatible with. But if you're choosing a boot like this, it's going to be more segmented as a touring specific boot. And now there is one, when I started talking about boots, I said there were 3 ways to go here. There is one more option here, and that's kind of just using your existing Alpine boots. If you're brand new to Alpine touring and you're looking at the price of all this stuff and you're thinking like, this is crazy, I don't even know if I'm gonna like this, I kind of just want to try it, you don't necessarily have to get a touring boot or a boot with a hike walk mode. Now, some of you, if you know anything about touring, you're going to be cringing a little bit maybe. I understand that there are huge benefits to having a walk mode, but I have personally toured with boots without walk modes, and you can do it. And that brings us to bindings. So hopefully after you have a little bit of a better sense of how to choose a boot, now we get into bindings, which I think for a lot of people is kind of the most confusing thing. Now let's start with that last scenario. If you're sticking with your existing Alpine boots and you're thinking like, I just want to try this Alpine touring thing, you're going to want a frame binding. These are proven, they've been around for a while, they're not like the flashiest, coolest thing on the market right now. But what's nice about these is you don't have to have tech fittings. So this is essentially a full-on Alpine binding. In this case, this is the marker F12 Tour. So this is essentially a Squire, a little different because it has a different din range. But this is essentially a Squire that's then mounted on a frame and you pivot off that frame. So you don't need tech fittings in your toe. This is all you need. You can put this, realistically, you could put this on any ski, use your existing boots, and all you would need is a pair of skins. So that's glossing over a few extra accessories that you will need that I'll talk about at the end. But that really is the simplest way to do this if you're brand new to the sport. Get a frame binding, maybe use like an old ski that's lying around in your garage. There's nothing wrong with that. Slap a skin on it, you can go Alpine touring. It's not going to be the most efficient thing in the world, but it works. And something like this can also work as a resort binding too. It's a releasable DIN certified binding. You can ski it in the resort. Now, in recent years, we've had a few new bindings on the market that have kind of changed things up a bit. You know, frame bindings were really, really popular for a long time for people that wanted really good downhill performance while also having the ability to go uphill. Now we have the Salomon Shift, or the Atomic and Salomon and Armada Shift. And most recently, for brand new this year, we have the Marker Duke PT, which comes in 12 and 16. The Shift comes in a 10 and 13 DIN range. So these bindings really align well with these 3 kind of hybrid boots that we talked about. You know, I think you can pull Salomon out of this specifically. I have the Atomic branded binding with me right here, but it's the same as the Salomons. So take this boot, this Shift Pro, take the Shift 13, put it on a ski like that QST 106 over there, and that's like a perfect example of a highly versatile setup that you can use in the resort, you can use in the backcountry. It's pretty darn good in both of those situations. It's not the lightest thing in the world, but it's highly, highly, highly versatile. And I think it's really cool. You know, if you're kind of in the market for a powder ski, or you're in the market for an off-piste ski in general, you want something that's a little more playful, and you're in the market for a touring setup too, that's a really good opportunity to kind of combine those two things, save a little bit of money, and get a setup that you can use in a wide variety of situations. Now, between these two bindings, between the Shift and the Duke PT, you can still kind of make decisions between those bindings based on how you ski as a skier. You know, we're going back to that skier profile. It's why I feel like it's really important to start with that. So if you're like really, really emphasizing downhill performance, I think as of now, this Duke PT 16 is pretty much the way to go. If you're more of an even mix of what you're looking to do, if you want a little bit lighter binding, a binding that kind of leans more towards the touring performance and still is really, really good as an Alpine binding too, I think that's in my opinion where the Shift comes into play and works really, really well, I'll add. Now, neither of these are the lightest bindings in the world, especially the Duke PT, but they're pretty darn light, and putting a Shift on a lightweight ski, and you really with any of these boots in front of me, that's pretty darn efficient for an uphill setup, and also can be very versatile too. Now, kind of moving on like we did with boots, if these three boots over here kind of spoke to you a little bit more than these three boots over here, or you're really planning on spending a significant amount of time touring, I think that's a good chance or a good moment to kind of stop and assess and think maybe I want to go even lighter with my bindings. So the Kingpins was another binding that came out relatively recently. It preceded the Duke PT and actually kind of changed the game a little bit in the sense that it's still a DIN releasable, DIN certified binding. But you're getting more into the pin tech world with the Kingpin 13. And again, going back to that kind of sacrifices, these do not perform as well as Alpine bindings as the Duke PT or the Shift. You don't have as much connection to your skis, you know, not as many contact points between the boot and the binding. It's just not as strong. You know, you'll get a tiny bit of flex out of this toe piece. It's not the same precision and power that you get out of these bindings over here. I also brought the Dynafit Rotation 10 in here, and this is even kind of leaning more towards that touring application. So would be a great binding to pair with this Scarpa and then put with a ski like the Zero G behind me. And you've got like a really, really good, pretty dedicated, quite lightweight touring setup. And I think this is a cool moment to mention that like you can go lighter than this too. Like randonnée race setups, when you start getting into that world, they're really light and kind of go further down that road of leaning towards touring rather than downhill performance. So that's a quick note on bindings rather. I think for a lot of people, these two bindings right here make it really, really simple, and they work really well as hybrid resort and touring bindings, which is why they've become pretty darn popular in the past couple of years. At least that's true for the Shift. The Duke is brand new for this year. But you know, don't forget about these frame bindings, and it makes it even simpler if you're really just looking for the most simplistic way to start Alpine touring. Don't rule out a frame binding. And that kind of brings us to skis too, which in my opinion is the easiest thing to determine. The easiest choice to make is skis. So if you spend enough time on boots, or assessing yourself as a skier, and then determining your boots, and then determining your bindings, skis should feel pretty easy at that point. So I brought a fair amount of different skis up here, and I think we could probably just kind of point to each one and talk about where it would fit in this whole collection of different different combinations of this gear and how it can work for different people. So that QST 106, like I said, I mean, that ski was specifically designed to be used with this binding and with this boot. It's all about versatility with that equipment. You can use it in the resort, you can use it in the backcountry, you can trust it anywhere you take it. It's not the lightest. In fact, I think the QST 106 is the heaviest ski I have on the wall right now. Kind of moving this way towards me, that Ripstick 96 Black Edition and kind of all-alon skis, or all-alon Ripstick models rather, they also are really good kind of hybrid alpine, resort, and touring skis. They're light enough for touring, they're efficient for the uphill, but they have really, really good downhill performance as well. So another one that would be really cool to mount with a Duke PT or a Shift. You could rip it around the resort with one of those bindings on it, especially if you had a boot like one of these these hybrid resort and touring boots. Still really powerful resort performance, but plenty of performance for touring as well. Now the Vocal Blaze, like the QST 106, that was basically designed to be used with either this binding or that Kingpin. So whether you want it, if you're looking for a resort powder ski that can double as a touring ski, be a great match with this Duke PT. Spending a little bit more time out in the backcountry, I think that would be a time to start maybe leaning towards, or at least considering, the Kingpin or a Rotation 10 or a binding like that. And then the Whaler 100, pretty similar, especially similar to that Ripstick 96. Highly, highly versatile. Would be really good with any of these bindings. I think you actually see a lot of people with when you get that light, and especially with DPS, we see a lot of people choosing bindings like this on skis like that. And then these skis behind me are starting to lean a little bit more towards that specific touring application. So this is the Corvus Freebird, which I actually think is the heaviest on this side of the sign. And then going down, the Hannibal from Fisher is really, really good. The Blizzard 0G is really good. The Backland 100 is really good. And we'll skip that last ski for now. These three skis especially, to me, are starting to feel more like touring-specific skis. Now, that said, that doesn't mean you can't use them in the resort. Just because if you're putting if you're putting something like a Kingpin 13 on one of these, or a Rotation 10, you can still ski those in the resort, but you're making sacrifices. You're making sacrifices in your alpine performance in order to have a lighter setup overall. Now, you can also do combinations of all these kind of different categories that we talked about. So people look at me a little bit funny in my touring setup. I right now have a Shift on a 0G, and I actually used this exact boot as well. So people look at that and think like that's silly, because these boots are not particularly light. The binding's not as light as I could go, but the ski itself is pretty light. And that's because when I look back at my, that profile I made of me as a skier at the beginning, I'm okay with my skis being lightweight, and if I'm going to make a sacrifice, so to speak, in one area of my equipment, I'm doing it in skis. I don't mind having a heavier boot because I like the alpine performance that it provides, the downhill performance that it provides, and I like the feel of having more contact points on a binding. So that's kind of where I make that justification, and another reason why I do that is because I have a lot of existing alpine skis that are heavier, stiffer, stronger than the 0G. So if I want to go out and ski fast, I'm just not going to do it on my touring equipment. When I'm going touring, I have a little bit different mentality about how I'm going to ski on the way down because of the ski that I've chosen. So you can combine all sorts of things up here. You can take a QST 106, put a Rotation 10 on it, and have a lightweight binding if you, as a skier, if you value the performance of the ski above all else, it's perfectly reasonable to make that choice. Now, I said we'd gloss over this ski, and I think we did. This is a cross-country ski. this is the Rossignol BC 100. So without diving into a whole nother world of skis, if at the start when you're making that skier profile and assessing your needs as a skier, if you kind of look at that and say, like, my goals for my touring equipment is to get outside, to explore, and to get exercise, you could also consider just getting a backcountry oriented cross-country ski. You know, this is all the way down that spectrum of lightweight and bad alpine performance, so to speak. You know, these are still fun to ski down hills, but your heel's never going to be locked in. You know, you're on a cross-country binding, but it's another thing to consider. And I think it's important to mention stuff like this when you're assessing yourself as a skier and assessing what would be right for you. Now, that's it. I'm going to leave it there as I get this ski back there. I'm going to leave it there. You know, I think I went as quick as I could while still providing enough information, I hope. Now, before I let you go, going back to that sense that alpine touring is like a lifelong journey, the next step from here, if you've made all these decisions, you're realistically like not ready to head out into the backcountry yet. Safety is really, 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 really important in the backcountry. If you're doing more resort-based touring, there's less variables, but I would still encourage this. Any kind of touring, if you're new to it, or even if you need a refresher, I strongly, 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 strongly encourage taking a safety course. You know, like I said, it's a lifelong learning experience, and you want to set yourself up for success. So taking a course like that where they go over avalanche safety and first aid in the backcountry and stuff like that, please, please, please go do that. This is a growing segment. There's going to be more and more and more and more and more skiers out in the backcountry this winter. And the last thing I want, especially as somebody who is sitting here trying to help you choose your equipment, the last thing I want is to hear of a significant increase in the amount of injuries in the backcountry this season. So yeah, please take the necessary steps and precautions to make sure you're as safe as possible out there. If anything, do it for me and my well-being, or my mental well-being. And I think we'll leave it at that for this video at least. You know, if you're ready to pull the trigger on a touring setup, if you're feeling confident about boots, bindings, and skis after this video, that's awesome. Feel free to reach out if you need help choosing skins or poles or backpacks or shovels or probes or beacons. There's a lot more to this stuff, and we're happy to help. We will be back with some alpine touring ski comparisons in our classic comparison video style. We'll try and do some binding comparisons as well. And then if you guys want, especially, and we'll try and get to this anyways, but we'll do another one of these kind of backcountry helpful hint guideline videos and talk more about the accessories involved. So for now, I appreciate you bearing with me and watching this whole thing. I know it was long, but this is it can be a confusing segment for a lot of people. So we wanted to spend some time talking about it, and hopefully you're feeling more confident about navigating all these different options. So we've had recent snow here in Stowe. We've been out alpine touring already. So yeah, hopefully you're on snow soon too. And we'll talk to you soon, and maybe we'll see you out there on snow.